You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Decisions we make shape the place we live. A century ago, Cincinnatians, like people in most American cities, made a series of critical decisions. The results were we abandoned the basin as a place to live, built hundreds of new suburban communities, tore down the buildings in the old basin, and invested in skyscrapers and department stores to create what we called the downtown. Beginning about 60 years ago, a series of decisions led us to begin moving those offices and department stores out of the downtown and to undertake a new round of subdivision driven by a new vision of suburban life. The result has been dramatic. Over the last 40 years, the population in the 10-county metropolitan region has grown only modestly, but at the same time, we have steadily moved residences, offices, warehouses, factories, and retail functions farther and farther out, absorbing more and more of the natural green belt and hollowing out the historic core. Although it may seem that this pattern will continue to define the future, nothing is inevitable. Europeans never abandoned center cities or embraced suburbs in American terms, and general American patterns have been shaped very differently by people in Boston, Los Angeles, Detroit, New York City, Portland, Indianapolis, and Cincinnati. As we open the 21st century, what is the range of options before us? That was the question tackled by 27 graduate students over the past 6 months in the School of Planning at the University of Cincinnati. Their report crystallizes some interesting options and is the focus this morning. To discuss the work of the studio, I am joined by Brenda Scheer, an associate professor of urban planning at the University of Cincinnati, and Kate Fischer, a graduate student at the School of Planning and the primary editor of the final report. Brenda, Kate, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Brenda, welcome back in your case.
Thank you.
Hypothesis, Brenda. The city of Cincinnati has problems, some of them serious. But the region is healthy, strong, and there's no reason to worry about the long-run development patterns.
Well, the region is relatively, it's okay. I wouldn't say it's really, really strong in terms of its growth over the past 20 or 40 years. But I think that what happens is that as the downtown and the center city empties out, the region itself weakens. The economy will weaken. Population growth will probably stagnate in the region as a whole, or not grow as much as it possibly could if we had a stronger central city.
And Kate, you know, your class, your fellow students, you and your fellow students working on this report, if current trends continue up to, say, 2020, next 20 years, sociologically, economically, what do you see this region being?
I see the urban center as being a core, maybe a place that holds the segregated population that keeps people out of the minority people out of the fringes, the
out of the
suburban fringes, yeah.
And this is the sort of issue of racial segregation that we've heard so much about in the last couple of months because of what happened in April, because of the Orfield report, because of other things. This is not new. In fact, most of the background data you are using here comes from established sources. Is that fair?
A lot of our data comes from the census, and we use some of the Orfield report as a basis for our study, but we really used a lot of census data and geographical data to help us determine the region.
One of the interesting things, and the important thing that we're going to focus on this morning is the fact that you developed these three sort of options, different ways that the Cincinnati metropolitan area could develop. And let's take a look at that first one. The first one is the urban service boundary option, and there's a little graphic that's on the screen at the moment. Brenda, what are the essential characteristics of this?
Well, it establishes a line where development would be encouraged. Right now, local governments subsidize new development, by providing roads and sewers, schools, and so forth. And what the urban service boundary would do would be to say that the the local government subsidies would only apply within the urban service boundary. And outside of those boundaries, a developer would have to pay for his own roads and his own sewers and his own schools.
And I think the impression is right now that, gee, when we have development out in the suburbs, everybody pays their own way. They're really, when we talk about subsidies, we always hear it in relationship to the core, to the downtown.
Right.
Are you saying there's subsidies out in new development as
Oh,
well?
absolutely. And one of the reasons that we have such uncontrolled growth is that counties, for example, like Warren County, have to find ways to subsidize, have to find ways to build new schools and build new roads, and new housing development doesn't pay its own way. So they have to bring in, they're forced to sort of encourage commercial development and business development, which do help to pay for those costs. But existing residents pay for them as well.
Okay. Now, Kate, this option, the urban service boundary option, being used any place in the United States?
The urban service boundary has been used in different variations. It's been used in Lexington, actually has the first urban service boundary.
So someplace very close to
Very
us.
close to here. And Portland, Oregon has an urban growth boundary, which is not the same as an urban service boundary. An urban growth boundary actually prohibits growth outside of this boundary line. But an urban service boundary doesn't prohibit the growth outside of the line. It just does not subsidize the growth.
Doesn't encourage the
Right.
growth. It actually encourages the growth inside the line.
Right.
Why did you choose that rather than the Portland approach?
Because I think it's more palatable to residents in the area.
Okay.
Frankly, that's why. It doesn't necessarily, we have a lot of space here, and I think that we can use that space. It can be used as long as it's used without the rampant just taking up of, just taking up of all of the space without any control. This is a control measure that doesn't prohibit, it just controls.
Okay, it just encourages by subsidizing certain things and not subsidizing others. A second model, a second sort of scenario, as you put it, is the multinodal region, and we also have a little bit of a graphic to show that. And this is a different image of how the area should grow. All of these are about what could happen in the next 20 to 40 years. Brenda, what are the essential characteristics of this?
Well, in a multinodal region, we encourage development in specific nodes. These would be higher density development areas than what you would normally see in Tri-County or something where it's really spread out over a big area. Here the development would be concentrated. There would be a mixture of housing, a mixture of businesses, and these would become sort of small mini downtowns on the edges of the region. One of the good characteristics about it is that these are pretty delimited areas. They're pretty small, compact areas, and they would be easily served by transit.
Would they be significantly, you mentioned Tri-County.
Right.
Would they be significantly different than the Tri-County we know today?
Oh, absolutely. Tri-County is a very spread out, sort of sprawled area, huge parking lots, one-story buildings. These would be areas that would be more like a sort of a souped-up Hyde Park Square. Something that has a lot of close-in housing. You could walk to shopping, you could walk to transit, you could walk to schools. So we're seeing these as areas that are relatively small, maybe not much larger than the current downtown, but not as developed with as tall buildings.
When we saw that graphic, Kate, there was a number, and I don't think any of us were counting. How many of these do you see, how many nodes do you see developing in the metropolitan region?
Our group proposed 11, and there are 3 different tiers of nodes. There's the largest one, which is the Cincinnati Central Business District, or the downtown area. And then there are 3 mid-sized nodes, which would be Sharonville, Florence, Kentucky, and Beachmont area. And then there are a number of 7 other outer ring nodes that are placed within many of the counties in the area. They're not every single county would have a node, because not every single county has the existing infrastructure to support it or the existing population to support it. These nodes were chosen based on where infrastructure, where population, and where economy really is centered.
When you say infrastructure, what do you mean?
I mean sewer and water, really, facilities. That's what.
Those are the keys.
Those are the keys. Those are the keys.
Now, Brenda, last time you were on, we were talking about the models of that sort of suburban, exurban growth, and the lack of streets, the lack of transportation, the lack of sidewalks. In order to get from Tri-County of today to the nodes of the future in this model, it's going to take a lot of investment, right?
Well, it would take a lot of investment, but investment is occurring out there all the time. We're assuming for all these scenarios that we'd have the same amount of growth, but that we would put it in different places. So the same kind of investment would be made, but it would be made in specific areas. And actually, I think the investment would be lower because we're not talking about extending streets, extending freeways, adding new freeway exits and so forth.
You were saying a key to this would be mass transit. Are we talking light rail here? Is that an assumption?
One of the advantages of a nodal system is that you could do it. It's not required though, because what these really are doing is trying to create compact growth centers so that growth does not occur in outlying areas. It occurs in these specific nodes.
Kate, I don't know. I didn't sort of come back to you on the same thing. Is this being done anyplace?
The multimodal scenario is actually being done. There's not a scenario just like ours, but in Washington, there are growth centers that have been chosen in the state of Washington.
Okay, state of Washington, and not Washington, D.C.
No.
Okay.
And there are similar ideas in the Minneapolis Twin Cities, the Twin Cities area. So, but not the same as what we have proposed at all.
Third option. Let's move on to the third option. What's the third option referred to as called?
The compact city.
Compact city, and we do once again have a little bit of graphic that the students created for this one. Kate, what are the essential characteristics of the compact city?
The compact city limits growth to the historic urban core. Basically, that would be Cincinnati in Ohio and Newport and Covington in Kentucky. However, we've made places that growth can occur, like Eastern Boone County has a phenomenal growth rate right now.
Because of the airport.
Because of the airport. And so we've included Boone County in the compact city because they're really pushing the growth in that area right now, and it seems like a good place for that.
What would this mean, practically speaking? Would you bring people back in? How would you keep things, Brenda? How would you keep things compact?
Well,
they seem so spread out now.
Part of it is actually to sort of encourage urban growth. These areas could easily hold. One of the things we found out when we did this was that given the vacant land, the vacant units that are already in these areas, they could easily hold about 3/4 of the growth we're anticipating over the next 20 years without increasing densities very much at all beyond, say, what we have in Clifton. So it's a matter of getting people used to the idea of coming back in to live in the city, comfortable with that idea. It would probably mean that we'd have to have some kind of land use legislation that would mean limited growth outside of those areas as well.
In fact, don't all of these depend not only on local decision making but also on state decision making with some new laws to channel these resources, to channel these energies? Kate, this requires a lot of cooperation, right? Any of these models.
They do, and in the states where they've been enacted, like Minnesota and like Oregon, it's all been state legislated. So this is a very important part of making or controlling the growth in the area. However, we've got 3 states here, so it kind of complicates it. What our group has proposed is a regional coalition or a group that would help to facilitate this control in the area.
Well, let me. You talked earlier about, well, you said you sort of took a particular option because you thought it would be more palatable politically. I spent a lot of time on this show with politicians, and we can't even get people to cooperate countywide. I mean, even inside of Hamilton County. Actually, Northern Kentucky does better than Hamilton County does with Forward Quest. But how do you propose to break through when you really, everybody loves to talk regional. I do too. But how do you break through from talking, imagining, to actually getting something done?
That's a good question. One of the things that we've talked about is, it all has to do with money, basically, I would say. So you have to if you're going to control growth in some areas and you're going to let it happen in other areas, you have to make the money go around to everybody. You have to make it accessible to everybody. So one of the things we talked about is tax-based sharing, which is what they do in Minnesota.
Which is?
Which is places that have a developed business share the revenues from those businesses with other parts of the area, like in different parts of the county. For example, in the urban service boundary scenario, we have half of Warren County as being developed and half of it is not being developed. So what would happen is all of the places that are gaining the revenue from the developing businesses would share that tax base with the outlying areas of the county.
This requires big breakthroughs in terms not only of politicians thinking, but in terms of general public, and I mean that's us, you know. And I noticed a letter to the editor in the Cincinnati Post this past week that saw a report about your study and basically said, how dare them try to tell me what I can and cannot do.
Yeah, well, there's always that kind of attitude. There's been that kind of attitude about land use planning and zoning, which is virtually everywhere in this country. Some people have a hard time with zoning. So this is just using zoning and other land use controls, other controls that we already have on the table, that we've been using for years, to try to make planning happen in a way that is advantageous for all of us. If we look at who the winners and the losers are in the future, we can say, well, are we all going to be winners if we're stuck in traffic, if the Walmart comes to our backyard, if we have a bunch of kids in schools that are suffering from their school situation, or are we going to let the land developers be the winners?
Mm-hmm. You know, that's why I keep having you back on, because posing these issues and posing these options, I think, really helps us clarify all these little choices we make a million times in the public sphere about whether to put a Nordstrom's here or a subdivision there or whatever. Those aren't isolated decisions. We ought to be thinking in some larger terms. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate your ability to put those on the table, and certainly the students' ability, and look forward to your contributions to pushing this forward, getting out there in the public and really doing it. So thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Stay tuned. Cincinnati's most socially conscious newspaper celebrates its 5th anniversary. After the break, the people who put out Streetvibes, a paper that provides both an alternative look at the life in Cincinnati and an alternative source of income for the homeless. Back in the early 1990s, the issue of homelessness and panhandling in downtown Cincinnati was hot politically. Council passed a series of laws making it a crime for the poor to ask for money. In 1995, local homeless advocates and activists began cooperating with a Cleveland-based homeless coalition to include a Cincinnati page in the Ohio Grapevine that could legally be sold on city streets. By February 1997, Cincinnatians led by Donald Whitehead, Pat Clifford, and others began publishing a local newspaper, Streetvibes. I am now joined by 2 people with Streetvibes. Dan Marschner is the editor of Streetvibes, and Ricardo Taylor is a regular columnist with Streetvibes. Both of you, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you.
Dan, how many copies are out? This is a monthly, is that correct? And how many copies do you publish?
We publish about 7,000 a month.
7,000 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me, because some people may not know, what happens to those 7,000 copies?
Well, we distribute them through vendors. There are about 20 to 30 in any given month who go to various areas around the greater Cincinnati area. A lot of them are downtown, also Clifton, Hyde Park, and throughout the greater Cincinnati. And they sell them for a $1 donation. Buy from us for 20 cents and keep the proceeds from that paper.
Okay, so from an individual vendor's point of view, they're able to actually make a profit, and the goal, the original goal, was to give people something legal to sell and valuable to sell and actually make some money from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so there's about how many people?
20 to 30 in a given
20
month,
to 30 on a regular basis. Ricardo, how long have you been connected with Streetvibes?
Well, I actually started selling seed bars February last year, and I started writing back in October. So 16 months I've actually been selling the paper, and I've been writing for the last 8 months.
Last 8 months.
Yes.
And you've got a regular column. Yours right now is running, this is the latest issue. It's running down the left-hand column now. There's a lot of newspaper columnists that would kill for that kind of location in space. What's the focus of your column? What are you trying to do?
Well,
Street views.
My Street Views talks about how people live in the streets, the things that go on in the streets. And what I find, when I get report from people in the street that I sell the papers to, some of our readers, And I find that a lot of things that people see but they don't understand, I try to give them some idea of how it really feels to be on the inside, to be in this type of life. And I get pretty good reviews for it. In fact, when I first started writing, Dan had put me on page 19. I started on the very last page. And now I work my way up to the first page because I try to, put some honesty into it and, give people a real feeling about how it is to be out in the streets like that.
So, like a typical reporter, or in your case, a columnist, a signed columnist, you're looking for that better location above the fold. I understand that feeling. One of the things about Streetvibes is that I think it really does give a perspective on issues that, because you're reporting about the same issues we're reading about in the Enquirer or we're hearing about on Channel 12 at night. Here was the issue that came out in May of this year about the riots, and titled Riotous Rebellion or Riot, and then opens up on the inside. Dan, what's the approach to news?
Well, the major emphasis is that we're trying to bring the voice of people who are homeless and impoverished in Cincinnati to the forefront, which means that we cover a lot of things that a lot of newspapers wouldn't cover. We talk about a lot of different stories that are really important to people who don't have the means to really survive in a lot of cases. And also,
what are some of those things that you cover that maybe nobody else pays any attention to?
Well, we cover a lot of things in regards to homeless shelters, welfare, that sort of thing, which occasionally get emphasis on normal papers, or regular papers, but a lot of times they're just kind of ignored or placed in.
Which I might point out in the May issue is the whole story about the potential closing of the Mount Airy shelter, which is one of the only shelters of its kind in this area for homeless men. It's right here on your front page. It's
probably buried
someplace. Not that it didn't get reported, but it's buried. Ricardo, have you also sold the papers out in?
I sell downtown.
You sell downtown?
Yeah, I'm kind of territorial, so Main Street, around Court Street and that area, because I kind of get, I got regular people who buy the paper, and it means a lot to me because I get to meet people, and I enjoy the people and they kind of enjoy me, so I'm kind of.
And do you find that people who buy the paper on a regular basis come back and talk to you about your column?
They always do. And they give me a lot of appreciation. I mean, it makes me feel good, because I feel like I'm giving something, of myself, and to brighten myself a little bit, so to speak.
And I think that's true. Those people who buy the paper on a regular basis, we probably are buying it from the same people because we're going to the same places. I know it's sold at our church every month, so there's certain people I see every month, or outside the downtown Y is another place that I end up getting to know the people who sell it a little bit and actually talking to people. So it's also a vehicle for real human communication, not just for reading print as well.
But that is one of the benefits for the vendors, to be able to get to meet people and you have rapport with people and make friends actually, and
Who else? Are there other people? Do you think of yourself as a street person, right?
Yes.
Other street people who actually write for the paper, not just sell it?
There are a few. There's like Brady and a couple of people. Yeah.
Okay. Dan, how many?
We probably get contributions, say 4 or 5 different writers a month, and those I find are the most powerful testimonies because they're raw and they're real, and that's why they're so much more important to include.
They're raw and they're real. Now, from an editor's, I'm going to ask Ricardo about this too. Editor's point of view, I'm married to an editor. Editors edit a lot.
Right.
Do you take what comes in and do you work with it?
To the best of my ability, what I try to do is leave the content alone and just try to make sure people can understand it. Because I think it's really important for people to get that raw perspective. People a lot of times are angry or upset or really hurt by their experiences, and to edit that out would be a real shame, I think.
And you know what? And I edit my own stories. I usually edit my own, and I find by the way Dan does it and the way I do it, the way it's done, it allows us to put your true voice out. Because there is no editing to take away. You don't take anything out of the script. You keep it just as raw as it simply is, and it gives more of an impression of how a person feels and what's really happening in their lives. I think it's a better scope for the reader simply because it allows him to get a better feeling rather than you write it and I make it up for you. So that sort of thing.
A lot of people would say, "Gee, I'm surprised that homeless people can write for a newspaper." What's that tell us about some of the people who are homeless out there?
Well, I would say that a lot of people are looked over or maybe are not understood, because there's a lot of talent. There's a lot of talent out there, but there's just not avenues for, you know, for a lot of people to present their talents. There's a lot of things that cause a person to be in a homeless condition. So there's times that he's not allowed to, you know, express himself or be able to, you know, just put his talents really out there simply because of his situation. So.
Dan, we've got less than a minute here. What's the future of Street Vibes? It's 5 years old. What happens now?
We want to help to increase the circulation. Also, long term, we're thinking about making it a bi-monthly publication. Mainly, we just want to make sure that people recognize it as a legitimate source for news, and people can really take it seriously and have a positive experience with homeless people.
Okay. So it's legitimate source for news and a way to actually interact with homeless people. Ricardo, you got your next column written?
Yes, I do.
You're already ahead on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Any trouble finding material?
No, because it all comes directly from my vision from being in the street.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on 5 years, and good luck in the future.
Thank you very
We
much.
appreciate you.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Join us again next week to meet the women and the men shaping our region for the future. Have a good week.